Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
Doing just fine, just fine. I want to start off with, big tech. I hear they've been around for a while, and they've been essentially nonpartisan. They've been partisan.
Yeah.
That's what they've been. Very partisan. On again, off again, punish people, reward people, and all this sort of thing. But the big tech is in the news now because some people don't think they're doing enough to, beat the Russians down.
Yeah.
And they should be more firm. And this has come up with members of Congress have talked about it. And the headline in Politico, it's interesting, Politico reporting this, at least we're getting some information. It says the title is, "A Hesitant Tech Industry Wields Its Power Against Putin." They don't address the subject of what is the proper role of big tech, but in this case, the big tech is sort of apologetic. Nick Clegg, who is a vice president of Meta, he says, well, this is not our role. This is not, but things are really, really bad, and we have to participate. It's our duty. That was his attitude. We have to do something about this. So they're joining in, and they said that you have to do more. And a congressman, since they're on a war against Putin, and they want to point out this. They don't think the big tech is doing enough. But the thing that caught me about this was that the big tech was sort of taking this position. We've never done this before, but this is so bad that we need to do something. Like, did they ever do it to use it against a sitting president?
Yeah.
It's a big fake. But all of a sudden, they're trying to get credibility from it. And it's part back again. We've talked about social media and are they private, are they public? But I think, if anything, this points out that social media is the arm of the government.
Yeah.
And I should not be hesitant. And at times I keep wanting to be careful not to regulate or say you shouldn't be doing this because you're a private company. Well, I'm about convinced totally, completely, in the true sense of the word, they're not a public company. This is not so much communism and socialism where the government owns these people, but it's closer to corporate state, corporatism, and approaching fascism, where there's enough power to get these corporations to do what they want. Of course, we talked about that numerous times when it came to with COVID. Why did the business people roll over? Isn't it interesting how in the last few months, I guess, we've drawn this analogy. We did it from the beginning, but more so on the analogy of fighting COVID and fighting Russia and dealing with Ukraine. It's that the principles are very similar. And the relationship of big corporations, whether it's with a military-industrial complex or big tech, there is a collusion. And there are also the people who willingly collude and follows the order. Some of them are very rich.
Yeah.
They're almost like an oligarch.
Yeah, they are. Let's put up that first clip, because here's the article we're talking about when it came out. And I think this is one of the most disturbing aspects. A hesitant tech industry wields its power against Putin. And you can go, here's that next clip. You referenced it, but here's the quote. "We're a company, not a government," said Clegg, "but we're also aware that we're in a company in a completely unprecedented situation, and this is a highly exceptional and tragic state of affairs." Well, he's lying because, as you point out, they've done this. They've been itching to do this. They started with Trump when they got rid of Trump off their platforms, and then January 6th was another opportunity for them to wipe people off of their platforms. But then for 2 years of COVID, if you dare talk about natural immunity, you have your account taken away. If you dare talk about anything except the approved government talking points on COVID, you were locked out of Twitter, you were locked out of Facebook, you were kicked off of the social media platforms. So they've been doing the bidding of government. And this is just that whole last 2 years on steroids. And what I think it is, Dr. Paul, it's creeping totalitarianism, because what they are doing is conducting total war. You know, war was once confined to the battlefield, and then of course there was information war. Now this is total war. The assumption that no matter what you say, no matter what you write, no matter how objective you might be, if you were a journalist in Russia, you cannot publish anything, you cannot be heard in the West. For your own safety, you're not allowed to read them. And this is really terrifying, because it happens to Russia today. Okay, it's the bad guy today. That's the Saddam Hussein of today. It's the Gaddafi of today. But tomorrow it will be something else, and they will push it further. It doesn't matter how you feel about Russia, how you feel about Ukraine, or anything else. What we're talking about is the war on the mind. Maybe Alex Jones was right with InfoWars, because it is a war for your mind right now.
You know, I want to emphasize one paragraph toward the end of this article. Because Congresswoman Kathy Morris Rogers, Republican from Washington, is the ranking member on House Energy and Commerce Committee. So she's well known, and she will be a chairman, probably has been, and she's going to be, and she's well liked for that matter. But she deals with this, but she deals with the management of the power. It isn't the thing that I was talking about a minute ago. Should they be doing it, or do you have to admit that these are not free market economies? We're working with corporatism. We're working with corporations that will be obedient to the state. So I just want to read a little bit here, because she's trying to direct, and control what they're doing, and that's what she deals with. And she says, specifically called for Twitter to shut down the Kremlin's office account and TikTok to block Russian-backed media from the platform. So that's her position. That's the Republican position, and I'm sure she had approval from that. So, but she had, now the point here the article makes, she had previously criticized the company's action to remove Trump. So the Republicans all of a sudden say, oh, you don't do it, we just do it at the bad guys. And all of a sudden, this is why the leniency on toleration of freedom of speech or anything in liberty. You know, if there are a lot of times when you're studying the issue of liberty where it seems like on the one hand this, on the one hand the other. I think when it's a toss-up, you don't have full understanding, you always have to or should opt for the position of freedom of choice. And but that's not what this is all about. This is a promotion stunt to use their power of the government to do such, to emphasize their position. But this was not a Republican position. The Democrats probably aren't going to yell and scream about what she said.
And that's the thing, and the point you always make. They're incapable of making a point on principle. On principle, people shouldn't be canceled for their views. Full stop. That's what it should be. Even if it's a government mouthpiece, like National Public Radio or whatever that we have, it should not be canceled because of that. But exactly, there's no principle. Oh, she's all fine with doing this to evil Russia, but how dare they do it to Trump? I like Trump. But here's something that's interesting, Dr. Paul. I put up that quote from Clegg where he said, well, we're not the government. You know who Nick Clegg is? He was a former Deputy Prime Minister of the UK. This is a senior government official who now is one of the top people at Facebook/Meta. And this is a merging of the state and the corporate sector, literal merging, and the corporate sector is now doing the bidding of the states, of the UK, of the US, of the European countries.
Yeah, and the terms are tricky, so that's why you should try to use definition. And I think to just carelessly say that they're all a bunch of communists, they're all a bunch of socialists, and technically speaking, that implies that there's a total ownership and control, and that is not exactly it. But there's still a lot of control going on, and that's why I use the term frequently about corporatism, the corporate state, and that means they have a relationship, and that's where money talks. And we were set up badly for this over the the last 100 years, as they wanted government to grow, since they started with the Federal Reserve and the IRS and all big governments, the welfare, warfare state. So that all went along. But when our government and our government officials talk about why we're over there, it sort of nauseates me, because they say, we're there. We have been the champions of liberty, and we go about the world to protect our constitutional rights and to protect freedom and the free market, which is, it's just sort of nauseating, because they've talked themselves into it, but their definitions can't even come close to what they should be talking about. So liberty needs a boost in people understanding what liberty really means.
It's such an insane thing when you think about it, Dr. Paul, because this whole philosophy that they're pursuing now by blocking media that they don't like from countries that are demonized, it assumes that everything written in that country's media is a lie. And it assumes everything written in our media is the truth. Everything they say is misinformation. Everything we say is absolutely pristine information, and we know that's not true. We know that sometimes foreign media lies and sometimes it tells the truth. We know that the U.S. media lies a lot. How about 4 years of the Russiagate lies, continuously lies? So it's a false premise. It's a false premise for political reasons. And I do have to again say, as YouTube blocked every Russian media from its platforms, there are good news. There's good news out there. There's places like Odyssey, which is a YouTube-type platform that says we're not going to ban RT. We're not going to ban anyone because we believe in a debate, in a robust debate. And so hopefully there'll be a next generation and a next wave of tech companies that'll see the mistakes made by that first wave of Facebook and Twitter and this sort of thing, and start embracing a more free speech. Because people aren't stupid if they see. Remember back in Iraq, the spokesman, they called him Comical Ali because he came up, everything is going good, everything is going good, everything is going good, and bombs were flying. People can see through this. They can see through propaganda. They should be given a little bit more credit for being able to see truth and lies.
I saw a danger in this because it was so blatant and so bold, because they've been doing all this, and that's bad, and we want to point it out when there's a collusion and they're helping certain groups. But this means they're very confident because it's so blatant. He says, they say we're a private company, but there are times when private companies have to be the arm of the government.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying.
Exactly.
So they have moved one step forward to further distorting the whole principles of what should guide us in government. So it's a step forward. But maybe people will realize, but that's why I use that one quote from the Republican Congresswoman, is she's part of that. And yet she's not, I know her and I liked her. She's not a bad person. It's just this confusion and this politicizing everything, well, if the party says that. And yet here on one hand, I'm always arguing the case that bipartisanship controls everything out there. But there also has to be the mystique of this two-party system that really hold people in check, and that's how this happens. And one thing is on the bad stuff they agree. On the bad stuff is what's likely to bring us down financially and militarily in our foreign policy, because we certainly aren't the nation that we once were when we were in a little better position to set a standard for the world and emphasize the freedoms that we have enjoyed. And even though it was always imperfect, there was a lot of freedom that allowed people to make a good living and take care of themselves. That's why people still come, because the image is out there. I just hope we can do something to preserve those rights so that when they come, they get a job and work hard and take care of themselves if they're coming into our country.
Well, our next thing we want to look at a little bit is related, and it's also something that we're familiar with. And this was a resolution that was on the floor. Let's don't put it up yet. This is a resolution on the floor passed by the House. Only 3 Republicans voted no. And it was stating that, quote, the House stands steadfastly, staunchly, proudly, and fervently behind the Ukrainian people in their fight against the authoritarian Putin regime. They pledged to deliver additional defensive security assistance, more rockets and missiles and things. So the one person who voted against it was Thomas Massie. and he has been hammered for his courage in this. And in fact, he made a little statement. Let's put it up. It's too long to read. But he says he supports the right of the people of Ukraine to self-determination. But he is concerned it contains an open-ended call for additional and immediate defense security assistance. He said the term is so broad it could include American boots on the ground or even the enforcement of a no-fly zone. And it goes on and on. It talks about the bad ideas. But that first one, I think, is so important because I know it's very familiar to you how they use that ambiguous language as a trap to eventually spring.
Ambiguity, the titles of bills, and it's everything. This is what we're doing, but we're really not doing it.
Yeah.
And it was easy to sort out the legislation. Oh, it's going to be the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And generally that's the case. And so many of the public announcements are like that. It follows through. It's not only when they try to pass legislation, it's when they have a policy statement that they're doing something wonderful and protecting liberty. I mean, this whole idea, how many times have we heard this nonsense that we go about the world, to protect our Constitution and our rights. It doesn't make sense. But there was one person that really went after the three that voted against, and that was Kinzinger.
Oh my gosh, not him
And
again.
I don't think I'm not surprised.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
put it that,
The guy's a
because
loon.
he is a deep-seated, authentic authoritarian. I mean,
Yeah.
he believes in it, and why he does it, that's his business, because he might not even know himself. He might think it's fun.
Yeah.
He might some people think it's the way to riches, it's the way to political power and all these other things. But it's not a surprise that he really goes after these three guys. But it's pretty amazing that the people who pass this nonsense all the time, they don't like anybody to resist. I remember one time, on occasion, I voted, by myself.
Yeah.
And there was one vote, and it was not really relevant. And there was one vote that was there, and the person that passed the bill came to me and actually was practically on his knees begging and pleading. It was so important to be 100% no resistant. And I said, look, it's not just one vote. I said, why do you even care? You got everybody else doing it. I mean, declare victory. But that always impressed me that plead. And, first off, did they think I was going to switch? Yeah. So it's amazing how they do that. So they feel like they have to speak out, and try to defend themselves, but sometimes it falls on deaf ears.
I remember Jeff would often get angry phone calls when that happened, and he would say, "This is a one no vote. Why don't you call the other 434 and ask why they voted yes?"
Yeah, there you go.
But as you've always said, and it's an important point, is that the 1998 resolution, it was just a resolution endorsing democracy for Iraq. And you warned at the time, you can go back and look in the congressional record, this is going to lead to war. This is how it starts. This is a slippery slope. Oh, come on, Ron Paul, that's ridiculous. Well, guess what happened, And we know they could put out a bill in praise of lovely puppy dog resolution, and you look in the fine print and there's let's blow up Ukraine or something,
Yeah.
They always do it like that.
Yeah.
So
They have their loopholes.
they have their loopholes. Well, let's look at the next thing. We're going to talk a little bit of money. Put on that next clip if you can. This just came out on Hedge this morning. White House asked Congress for $10 billion in Ukraine aid and another $22.5 billion in COVID funds. And this is she is the head of the Office of Management and Budget. Her name is Shalinda Young. Here she is talking to Congress. She says they need more money. And she says after this, they're going to need even more money. What is this going to do, Dr. Paul? Is this going to solve the problem?
Oh, of course. It's the problem of boredom, and now they can deal with a deep recession and depression. It's amazing, though, with all this debt, and they still pretend that the deficits are important, but sort of. But, the Republicans actually spoke out against this. in a very weak way because they've voted for but Mitch McConnell, who's not exactly a conservative. he was complaining. He says, we just passed and this 22 billion is for COVID. I thought that was all over. So he says at 1.2, he says there's no accounting. Nobody even knows what they did with that. And here you are back for 22 billion more, and nobody seems to. There's no alarm bells. Certainly, you're not going to get it in the Washington Post or anything else. You're not even going to get it from too many. But you have to say a little bit of this. This is a little bit of recognition that there's a handful of conservatives who think you're spending too much money up there. But the spending continues, and I've seen them more concerned when it was $1 billion to $2 billion than when it goes from 25 $1 trillion up to $30 trillion. And it's a non-event.
Yeah.
And the world accepts those dollars, but eventually they won't.
Well, as we keep saying, President Biden has said, Americans are going to have to feel some pain because we got to support Ukraine. I just wonder how patient they're going to be. I drove by the gas station. I always sort of check this in the morning to see what the prices are. I'm curious. 10 cents it's up from yesterday to today over at the local gas station. And that's pretty incredible. And there's going to be a lot of pain for this, and they're going to try to hide behind providing democracy over Ukraine when our economy crashes. They really have the same mentality as they did on COVID. Remember, they thought with COVID they could just turn the economy off. It's like an on and off switch. And then when it was done, they could turn it back on. They could close every business for COVID for 2 years and then turn it back on. Well, we realized that didn't work. We have supply plan. And so they didn't learn their lesson. They think they can do the same thing. They're going to shut down global trade because they don't like Russia's actions in Ukraine. It doesn't matter what you think of those actions. It matters the repercussions of this concept that you can switch the economy on and off like a switch.
And there's been a lot of emphasis and agreement with Republicans and Democrats. You got to go after the oligarchs, the rich people in Russia.
Yeah.
But to argue that they're all free market people that earned a good living in the free market, that'd be a different story.
Yeah.
But they have talked pretty consistently together on this, and because it's easy to attack the oligarchs. These terrible people have big vessels and all. And I got to thinking, well, what would be similar to that? And I would say there's a lot of in the social media.
Yeah.
They're the arm of the government. What about, there's a few people that's made a few bucks in the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah. And there's just more than a few that made a lot of money building weapons. Yeah. And they have to keep the war effort going and the pretense of war, and with the fear that there's going to be a other war. But and really, for us to go and decide that all of a sudden it's the rich people in Russia, it would be much better, because my argument about how you change things is you set an example for people and never use the force and violence to try to tell people what to do. And the example, and I think America was like that at one time. We had an example of the freest nation and the wealthiest nation, and we were motivated by different principles. Yeah. But it's one of those things that we could change by having an example. But Biden the other day, I want to mention, he mentioned when he was talking about inflation. Mm-hmm. It was meant to be, because I was watching it here and there, but I was walking through the room when he was solving the problems of inflation. And he said, you can't pick on the working person. You can't regulate and lower wages. Well, I agree with that, no wage control. But he said, the answer to this is cut costs. Just like the businessman is out there, all of a sudden he's going to cut costs. And I thought, and here is the President of the United States. He probably even had a speechwriter helping him, and that is so nonsensical, just it never touching on the real issue. They wouldn't dare touch the issue that, indirectly spending does have something to do with it. Indirectly, or more directly, the Federal Reserve has something to do with it, and big government and warmongering and welfareism has something to do with the spending and the debt and the printing of money. Maybe that's why the value of the dollar gone up. Didn't hear that at all. It's just cut costs. Cut costs. It's a businessman. You need to cut your costs. Yeah.
Well, I've got a couple of little quick closing things. And the one, you know, I don't want to harp on this idea, but the hysteria of the Russia-Ukraine clash is so reminiscent of the hysteria over COVID. If you said the wrong things, you were banned, you were attacked, you were an anti-vaxxer, what have you. It's the same mentality and the same hysteria. It's keeping people at a constant state of maximum fear, maximum anger, maximum paranoia. Well, here's a goofy example and a pretty sad example. Put that next one up. This is the Washington Post. I'm sure Putin is quaking in his boots now. The International Cat Federation has banned Russian cats from competitions. Well, that's going to do it. That'll win the war. And here's the one that's even more cruel and sad. Let's do this next one. Russian and Belarusian athletes were barred from the Winter Paralympics in Beijing in the eve of the games following the threats of boycotts from other teams. So these poor guys are out there and gals. They've got problems. They're in wheelchairs. They're trying to do some sports in the wheelchairs. Stay home. You're to blame because Putin decided to invade Ukraine. It's so sick. And I have a final one, but I can't not comment. Dr. Paul had the craziest interview yesterday on Indian television. Everyone's talking about it. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but it's just going to shock you. I'm trending #1 in Twitter in India. So
I hope it's good.
No, well, it's weird. It was a comedy of errors, and I was pretty unhappy yesterday, but it's pretty hilarious today. So anyone interested, you click on it and you're going to see some funny things. Just look for me on Twitter. But the last one is good news, and let's look at that last clip. This happened yesterday. Great news, I think, for us. And a big thank you to you, all of you viewers. The Ron Paul Liberty Report has now surpassed 300,000 subscribers. And I know people will say, well, it should be 30 million. That would be great. But one step at a time, and we'll take it when we get it. And that's why we appreciate you watching the show, especially in these difficult times. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Please click like. Please make sure you're signed up for notifications. Please make sure you comment and get the shows more action. That'll get us put up there higher and hopefully get more recommendations. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org and sign up for updates there as well. They're free. And look what we have up. We have a great piece by Chuck Spinney up today, old friend of mine, talking about how defense spending helped get us into the mess we're in right now. So I highly encourage that. Dr. Paul?
Yes. You know, you mentioned about the sports and the ridiculousness of punishing people. That's not the right approach. Why should the innocent people who have worked very, very hard, we can't let you go? It reminds me of what happened under Carter. Yeah. You know, that would have been for the 1980, I guess, Olympics. And the Russians, the Soviet system at that time, invaded Afghanistan. They were going to conquer Afghanistan. And there were a few people around then that said, don't go to Afghanistan. It may end up to like a 20-year war if you're not careful. Well, anyway, that finally came. But the whole thing is, what Carter did then was he prohibited our athletes from participating in it. They punished them, but Congress took care of that because they wanted to make sure these athletes wouldn't go home empty-handed. So the Congress gets together and they vote to give everybody a gold medal. And I thought, well, you know, that is so bad. But that continues to go on, that they punish people, and it's ongoing now, you know, with all this stuff. But you know, I learned a very practical lesson. Most people knew that that I played a little bit of baseball not outside of Congress when we played against the Democrats. So it was one time things were different. It was more like natural humanity activity, that is playing sports. And the one thing I remembered playing Republican against the Democrats, it wasn't bipartisan, it was a real game, and people and they enjoyed it. But what happened years later, no matter what, you always remembered the people who played baseball, and there was a special relationship, not 100%, but there was something different about that. That's why I do preach the gospel of play more together, get along and have sports together. And, you know, that's the kind of thing that might have happened, you know, if we had not had those horrendous embargoes against Cuba for 50 years, which didn't accomplish very much, that we should have been playing more baseball with Cubans. So no, I think the getting together outside the confines of a political system or a money system or what's going on now, that's just a horrible example of the reaction of the battle between NATO and Russia. So unnecessary. It's preventable. It's just with a few simple things. For us, we only have to take one position. Get us out of NATO, and it would have helped us a whole lot. We might be able to send more money to better jobs, and people might not have to have the homelessness growing in this country. No, the solutions are not difficult, but the politics of it all and the emotionalism that's attached to it, that is the tough part. But I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon to the Liberty Report. Thank you, and see you soon at the next event.